So my family's from the Midwest, but when I was five, my father had joined Caterpillar and we moved to Europe, which influenced my entire life. So I spent first and second grade in Rome, and then third, fourth, fifth, sixth, part of seventh in Geneva. And then we moved back to the Midwest. And those 5-7 years, taught me to play soccer, which I was recruited for college, lifelong skier, spoke French. My wife is French. We have a house in France. I'm involved with a lot of international organizations. So it was a great experience.
Where in the Midwest exactly?
So born in Milwaukee, lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, lived in Peoria. And then most of my high school, though, 8th grade through high school was about an hour outside of Cleveland.
And do you have fond memories of Europe and growing up and kind of going to school there?
Great memories. I had a great experience. So really enjoyed it, had fun, did a lot of sports, traveled throughout Europe. Was a very sheltered family that really opened up by going to Europe. And I now spend about 4 months a year in Europe. And my kids have all spent time there. They have French passports. So it's become a very international family.
That's awesome.
I think when we were going to record this before, I think you were traveling to Europe. So I imagine you're back in the States now?
Yep. I'm in New York right now, but I was in France last week, Ibiza 2 weeks ago, and Scotland 4 weeks ago.
Amazing.
Awesome. Thinking back, as a kid, it sounds like you had kind of different hobbies and interests and things like that. Did you have like a vision of what you wanted, your adult life to look like in terms of what you imagined your career would be?
So, when I was filling out my SAT form in high school, you had to put down your two main interests. And my interests were both business and sort of politics. And here, 40 years later, those are still two of my biggest interests. So I was interested in business. I thought I was going to be more running large companies. That was sort of the framework. And my father worked for very large companies. So I sort of thought of that as the default. But that changed over time. And I've always been interested in public policy, in politics. Thought I would run for office at some point, but later on decided I didn't want to. But I'm still involved in New York, the city level, the state level. Even I was in DC last night on the national level as well.
How did you come to be interested in these two things? Besides seeing where your father worked and maybe his experience, did you have any other insight as a kid into business and entrepreneurship and all these other politics, things like that?
I'm not sure. Both my parents were interested in politics, so I've always been intellectually interested in public policy and politics. And on the business side, I thought of myself as more of a leader, not as an entrepreneur. So I always ended up running, like I ran my high school student council. I was the third, fourth, and fifth grade class, president. In college, I ran a bunch of political and business organizations. So I just sort of naturally gravitated towards leadership, and other people felt comfortable with me doing that. And it was only really in my early 30s, when the internet started, that I started seeing that there was an industry that intrigued me, where it was all by definition going to be startups because it didn't exist. And I just thought, well, that's the way to go. And now for 25 years, I've only done startups.
What led you to either believe or to know that you were a good leader?
Part of it was other people early on were choosing me, just in high school before. People were like, oh, you should be the head of student council, or you should run this or be the class president. And so I was like, sure, I'm happy to do that. I felt confident. I felt okay doing it. I liked public speaking. So it felt pretty comfortable for me. It was less a drive to go do that than it just felt natural. And I've felt that my whole life.
And did you, at the time, I guess you're in high school when we're talking about the student council stuff, did you have any skills that you wanted to learn and build beyond just leadership?
A lot of it was what I love about the training you get from doing things in high school and college is that, if you run a student organization, absolutely no one needs to be there. And so the only way they're going to be there is because they're having fun, they're enjoying it, they believe in the mission, whatever you think your mission is. So it actually trains you in the way you need to be as a leader, not the sort of asshole, like, do what I say, because otherwise people are like, I'm out of here. I don't need this. So I think those trainings are very, very valuable.
Would you say you had a pretty strong desire and drive to be successful in life from a young age? And if you did, where did that come from? Sometimes it comes from family dynamics, maybe not having as much money when you're a kid and you want to, be very wealthy, or maybe it comes from wanting to make a, serious impact in a particular industry or something. Where did it come from for you?
My parents would say that I was sort of competitive and driven from an incredibly early age. That whether it was I did a lot of sports, just really wanted to win, wanted to get better, wanted to improve, was very focused at an early age on how do I improve my technique and get better. When I was, when I applied to Yale, I decided I wanted to go to Yale when I was a freshman. I had never met anyone who ever had gone to Yale, Harvard, or Princeton. I just decided that I thought that was the best school undergraduate in the country. And so that's where I wanted to go. And so was on a path to go do that. So yeah, I definitely, but I was in a very comfortable household. We were not wealthy, but we were the same as everyone else. Didn't really feel like we were missing anything. Great dynamics with my parents and my siblings. So I've had no pain, trauma. I've had a psychologically incredibly uninteresting life. Just a happy, great experience.
Kevin, I'm curious, did you or were you hard on yourself? Like, did you ever set such high expectations for yourself and feel like you were putting this unnecessary pressure on you to achieve?
Not really. I don't have a lot of memories of that ever. I felt more almost mechanical, like, okay, I didn't play golf, but if I was playing golf and there was a number, let's say you shoot a 90 and you were hoping for 88, but 90, now you got to think about how do I get down to 88, which I didn't get today. Work on that. You get down to 88, you hope there's an 86, and you just keep going. And, I think everyone needs to learn that you're never going to accomplish every single thing in your life. I mean, you're not going to be whatever Jeff Bezos professionally. You're going to do well, whatever that well is, and you're going to have to adapt to that and feel good about where you are. So it's the journey that's important. And in all sports, you can have an incredible time, even though your team didn't do that well. But you love playing soccer, you love the camaraderie, you loved the competitive nature, and you had fun. I always make sure I had fun.
Yeah. You talk about going to Yale, presumably you were a good student and did well in academics. What were some of the subjects that really interested you, and what did you end up studying at Yale?
So I ended up going into senior year in a position to either major in art history or economics. And I decided to choose economics because I liked art history a lot, but I wasn't going to be doing that professionally. I was very good with numbers, and so I felt like I was going to go down a business path, and that economics made more sense, although I actually enjoyed the art history a little bit more. And enjoyed probably political science more. But at the time, this was in the mid 80s, I thought I wanted to go on Wall Street. I spent my first 4 years having a very good experience on Wall Street, got sent to London, came back, worked on leveraged buyouts, M&A. And actually, a lot of people don't like it. I enjoyed it a lot, and then went off to business school.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And business school was overseas, right?
Yeah.
You ended up going
So I went to INSEAD, which is outside of Paris, which is probably the best international business school. Also one that people just love the experience. And it's also 1 year. And all those things were attractive to me. And probably one of the best years of my life.
Yeah.
Kevin,
what was that experience? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, you obviously grew up in Europe as a young kid, but what drew you so much to Paris and France and wanting to go back?
So I always have liked spending time there. I was sent over to London because in 1987, the city of London was opening up. It was deregulated. It was a very exciting place to be in the financial system in the world. And then I loved the fact that I could jump on a plane and in 1 hour be in any one of 30 interesting places. More interesting and more diverse than from New York. I could fly to Boston or DC, but frankly, they're not as interesting as flying to Brussels or Dublin or Copenhagen. So I love that experience. Thought I still had this international interest. So I thought INSEAD would be a great fit. And it was.
You talk about that 1 year at INSEAD being a very, good year or impactful year in your life. What were like the biggest takeaways from going to business school that you can share?
So for me, it wasn't so much about learning specific business skills, because you don't have to go to business school. It's not like law school. It was more that I made incredible friendships. I met my wife there. Last 2 years, 3 years ago, 6 a.m. on the playa at Burning Man. I'm there with two classmates from INSEAD. We're all 56 years old at the time. And we run into a fourth. And so these are people I've been in touch with for a long, long, long time and shared a lot of interest with. So amazing, international, fascinating friendships.
Yeah. And so what ends up happening after you get your MBA? Is that, I think I saw, was that when you went and worked at DoubleClick, and how did you even come across
No, there were
that
two
opportunity?
stages before that. So I
Yeah.
wanted to stay in Paris because my wife was going to work for her family company and an amazing job in Paris. So we decided to stay. I worked for Disney. Disney was opening Euro Disney at the time, and so it was a big, huge expansion, U.S. company. I worked there. Wasn't that enjoyable. It was very big, very bureaucratic. I was working in finance and operations. I didn't enjoy it that much. And then I got a job back in the States to be the CFO and COO of a division of EW Scripps, which was a media company. And it was a 180-person division. I had a lot more responsibility. I had a team of 50 people, which was a very big team for me. I was 30 at the time. So I came back to that, had a wonderful experience. And as part of that, read about the internet and started a website, the Dilbert website, because we own the rights to Dilbert, among other things. And that website in 95 became very successful. And we had advertising, we had e-commerce. And so I thought, we should really leverage this. The internet's going to be one of the most fundamental things I see in my lifetime. So I went to the parent company and said, look, we should invest more in this. You should give me money. I was thinking as a good, loyal corporate citizen. They thought about it and said no. They didn't really buy into that. And so I thought, you know what? I'm so convinced of this idea, I'm going to go do it myself. And so I went out and I was going to start an internet company in the advertising space. I ran across DoubleClick, which had 12 people at the time. They were 6 months old. Met two guys who had a deep technical background who were very impressive. They said, why don't you come join us instead? So I joined as the CFO, then became the president, then became the CEO. And we built that company. And 4 years later, we had 2,000 employees in 25 countries. So that's what I spent those 4 years doing from the age of 32 to 36. Crazy, crazy experience.
Yeah. How did you even come across, a 6-month-old company like DoubleClick? I mean, was it just people, like introducing you, that kind of thing, or was it by chance?
So it's hard to remember, but in 1986, there were probably 150 people working in the internet in New York City. Yeah. And so if someone had a little, I'll call it a conference, it would fit in one room. So it didn't take very long to meet everyone working in the internet at that time. And because I had actually quite a successful site, I was one of the people at the table there. Everyone wanted to work with us, sell our advertising, do e-commerce with us, do something. It was just a tiny, tiny, tiny industry. Mm-hmm. And so it was not hard to meet everyone. There were only two companies, the predecessor of 24/7 and DoubleClick. I met them both, and I decided to join DoubleClick and not start something on my own.
Yeah. Kevin, was it enough of a success at that point that you could technically just retire and do whatever you wanted to do for the rest of your life, or you had to kind of keep going?
No, you mean before DoubleClick? Not at all. I mean,
no,
I was
after DoubleClick.
Oh, after DoubleClick, I definitely could have retired. Yeah. So then I stayed there a total of 9 years. We went public. At the peak, it was worth $13 billion. Although the company got sold for $3 billion in 2008. So even though I wasn't a founder, I definitely made enough money, tens of millions of dollars, that I probably could have stopped working. But I have no plans to stop working now, and it's a lot has happened since then. So I enjoy what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. So you're obviously now you're in your, I want to say, early 40s at that point, early 40s.
Yeah, 41. Yeah.
At that point, 41 years old, you've got more money than you know what to do with, I assume, in your account. Yeah. What are you thinking in general?
I started a company before we even completed the sale of DoubleClick. I had already started another company.
What was that one?
So at the time, the founder one of the two founders, who was the CTO of DoubleClick, and I decided to start a company called ShopWiki, which was a search engine for shopping. And we started with a third person from the most brilliant young engineer named Elliot Horowitz. And that company did okay for about 2 years. We sold it. And then we had another company at the time. But in 2008, we started 3 companies. We started Mongo, which is today worth $22 billion. We started Business Insider, which became a very successful media site with 300 million uniques. And we started Gilt, which became a very successful e-commerce shopping site with $500 million in revenue. So we got pretty lucky. All 3 started that year. I was chairman of all 3. Dwight and Elliot spent almost all their time on Mongo. I split my time, and then after a year and a half, stepped in as the CEO of Gilt. And the reason I did that was in year 2, we did 175 million in revenue, which is a crazy number for a startup. I mean, no one's ever done that in New York. And so the internal systems weren't working well. The fast growth was straining the systems, and I actually felt like I was the right person to figure that out. And so I did that, was CEO for a couple of years, and brought in a CEO to replace me. And the next week started Zola, which is a wedding registry, which does this year will do about 600 million in wedding presents.
You know, I will say no,
go ahead.
Go for it, Pat.
I was just gonna say these are all just like incredibly successful companies. I'm just curious, maybe we can talk about your approach to starting these companies. I mean, it seems like there is some sort of systematic approach, and correct me if I'm wrong, but how do you even begin to conceive these ideas and start building out the systems that you end up having all these home runs? I guess what's kind of the approach?
Yeah, so the approach is not so unique. And by the way, I should say at the time I was generally starting a company a year, and I didn't have staff or things like that. Now I have a full company that does this, AlleyCorp. So I have 20 people on the business side. So we have many people in verticals that are thinking about this. And now we start 8 companies a year. But the idea, is no different than anyone else. You're always thinking of a product idea. You're trying to find a problem out there. You have to have a vision for something that's going to be different and better than what's out there. So Mongo is a fundamentally better database than the other choices at the time. Business Insider, we forget, at the time, Business Week and the Wall Street Journal did not update their websites during the day. That's even hard to imagine today. This is only in 2008. Because they didn't want you to not buy the newspaper the next morning. And they were still on the schedule, which they've been on for 100 years, of you write the stories at night, they appear in the morning, and that's just how life works. And so, what we did was say we're update things all the time, frequent, stories, people write multiple things per day, more opinionated, punchier, all the things that are almost standard in the internet today, but were not as standard in 2008. So it just was people forget now, it was a very different product. And that's why, the reason everyone turned us down for Business Insider is they said, you don't have a media background, nothing works in media, it's not going to work, everything you're doing is insane, and you're telling us you're never going to buy advertising. You've never seen an ad for Business Insider. And yet, just because it's good content, you're going to end up with 300 million uniques. That's insane. And that is exactly what happened. But it's all
who's telling you this? Investors?
Oh yeah, I mean, I joke sometimes that raising money for Business Insider or for Mongo was like my high school dating career. It was rejection, followed by rejection, followed by hostile rejection, followed by, if you were the last person on earth, I still wouldn't invest in you.
So, but so you the idea comes about, and then do you start, like, for example, let's take Business Insider as an example. How did you meet Henry Blodgett, who ends up being the CEO and you the chairman? Like, how did you, like, for each of these companies, like, what was the process like for that?
So at that point, I didn't use a search firm, but I just went out and I interviewed. I mean, no different than if you were hiring someone, CFO, what would you do? You'd say, well, I'm going to go find a bunch of candidates. I interviewed 7 people. Henry's one of them. I vaguely knew Henry, not that well, but I'd met him once or twice. And he was friends of friends. And so he was one of the 7 people I met. And I said, I think you should do this. He loved the idea. And by the way, he's still the CEO today, 14 years later. We sold it 7 years ago. And he's done an incredible job. He was an amazing pick.
Yeah, but what do you look for when deciding who to partner with to run these companies and to
Yeah.
build these companies?
So in the beginning, what is most important is the person understands the product. Because for the first 2 years, you don't have a lot of revenues, so you don't need a CFO. Uh, sometimes it takes you a year to even launch, so you don't even need sales. Whoever's creating the product, that's the most important thing. And so that CEO ideally has that background. So in Mongo, it had to be Dwight and Elliot as engineers who are actually coding the product. At Business Insider, it's the editorial. And so Henry had a unique vision for editorial that was not like Wall Street Journal and everyone else. And at Gilt, it was product. When you think of the internet product side, design, the design and the merchandise for Gilt was essential. So I found people that could do that in all three cases.
Kevin, early on, did you have expertise in any of those areas? I mean, whether it's Mongo or Gilt as
Zero.
a fashion company or Business Insider, so you have zero experience. So what gave you the confidence that these could work?
You're thinking of the consumer. So I was very confident as a person who reads business news all the time that there was a need for what I was providing. That something, all of the things I talked about, punchier, better product. So that I knew. On the database side, I had to rely a little bit more on the judgment of Dwight and Elliot, who are deeply technical. I knew that when I was at DoubleClick, that Oracle was the most expensive software product we bought, and one we didn't like, and you had to hire all kinds of people to implement it, and it was slow and not as scalable as we wanted. It wasn't the product for today. So and Gilt, this was that idea, by the way, I had seen in France. There was a very successful company doing that in France called Vente Privée, and most people don't know it. And so I knew that if we provided dresses at 50% off, people would be very happy to buy them. And it didn't exist at the time in the United States. So I didn't know anything about fashion, but I knew other people did. And so we'd find those people.
So let's just take Gilt as a case study, for example. So you, as Kevin Ryan, know that there's a similar company or same company or very similar company in France. Yeah. You're not a fashion guy. You've operated businesses, and you have a belief that you think there's a need for something like this in the U.S. or North America.
Yeah.
How do you find the right people? With having what I just said, basically, how do you find the right person? How do you know they're the right person?
So the first people I need, So then it's just hiring like any other job. So the first people I needed were really a CTO to build the website, because you don't need any merchandise for 5 months. You need to have a website. So I went out and just through my own network found a guy I'd never met before, but I saw a resume who was amazing. So I had two deeply technical people to build the website in the beginning. Then I needed two people, Alexis and Alexander, who could get out there and had some fashion background. One had worked at Louis Vuitton, one had worked at eBay, who had e-commerce and fashion background, had relationships with brands, who could go out and try and pitch this and sell it. And then I hired, they found an amazing design person, UI design person, who had worked in fashion. And we just we hired very, very good people. And look, over time, it's no different than if the three of us were putting together a basketball team. Do the uniforms matter? Do the training techniques matter? No. We need 5 players who are really good. That's 95% of life. And everyone in basketball knows that. And in a company, it's no different. And sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't. But I think I've had a pretty good track record of hiring good people.
And I've read that you're a pretty active chairman, pretty hands-on with the companies that you've started. But even as chairman, I'm sure you have to kind of relinquish some of those duties to, the operational duties to, the CEO or the CEO or the C-suite team who's running the company. And do you think, we've seen examples like the case of Steve Jobs with Apple, where he was kind of the initial visionary founder guy, came in, did his thing, was ousted, and the company wasn't doing well until he came back, because he was like the original visionary, like the person who came in as the CEO. How important do you think that is? Because it's almost like a different case with you. It's like you've sort of envisioned these, these companies, put in the right people in the right places to build them out, who maybe didn't have the initial vision, but saw the vision and shared the vision. I'm just curious what you think about that in terms of how important it is for the founder to be
It's
the
it no. So there's a myth in Silicon Valley that only this original founder has the vision, and that is just completely wrong. It makes for a good book. It's just not true. I mean, look, I spent time with Larry and Sergey when they had 50 people. There was not a vision for everything they're doing today. There just wasn't. What they wanted to do was just create a good search engine that was better than other search engines. And then they built over time, but it could have been someone else. You know, what was the vision for Business Insider in the beginning? It was a business news site online that, updated all the time. Yeah, guess what? You understood it. There's nothing more, and even you're on the site today, you're like, that's what it is. Gilt, what's the vision? I mean, you're on the site, you can understand it in like 10 seconds. It's the execution that matters. So I don't buy that there's only one person. I mean, if you started working in one of these companies in the first 3 weeks, you get it as much as anyone. Then it's learning from your customers and building the vision over time. Like at the beginning, we were doing women's clothing, which was obvious. Then we're like men's clothing. Then someone said we could do travel. Dynamics are the same. I never thought of that, but like a good idea. Then we did kids, we did home. So you build that over time. So no, there's a secret in being a good chairman, which is the CEO has to run the company. You are an advisor to the CEO. And if you think they're not the right person, your job is to change them. But until that happens, you are there to make them successful. And so today, I interviewed 2 potential CEOs this week. I assure them I'm not going to be running the company. I chair 15 companies. So I'm definitely don't have time, to do your job. I definitely don't want to do your job. It's an incredible pain in the ass if, I have to do your job. And my first job will be just find someone else. The problem I think in the Steve Jobs situation, when founders either get fired or move to chairman and they didn't want to, and they don't have another job, they spend all their time trying to do your job and second guessing, and that's not productive.
So, Kevin, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people want your job, right? Where they are the visionary, they get to work with the operating team. And frankly, I'm one of those people. I mean, like not because of the wealth creation potential that's a part of it, but more so, I think that you do realize at one point of your life that you are a better, perhaps, visionary than an operator, and that's completely okay. And that there are ways to make money, and in both of those areas.
Absolutely.
How you obviously when you started, Alley, you were in a position of let's call it leverage, where you had already created wealth. How does one call it? Let's use me, right, Pat, whoever else that's in our positions. How does one do, I guess, this path of serial entrepreneurship as a visionary early on without having to necessarily be the best operator?
Yeah, and there's some elements about it that are hard in that situation, because here's what happens. If I come to you and I have this idea, and basically I have a PowerPoint presentation. I've done a lot of work. It's a good idea. And I say to you, look, I think you should be, the CEO, and you should have whatever 18% of the company and get a salary. Part of you is going to say, well, wait a second. I can just start my own company. If I'm going to be the CEO, I'll start my own company and do it. The reason I can convince you to do it often is because, 1, I'm putting in $1.5 million so the company's funded. And 2, you're going to get paid a decent salary right away. 3, hopefully you believe, you have to like the idea, but 3, you have to believe that I'm going to add value. And so hopefully you're thinking, Kevin raised 37 rounds of financing last year. Every single VC firm knows him. That's probably going to help me when I raise money. He's going to add some value. Whereas I have some people come into me and they're like 27, and they're like, I want to be chairman of 7 companies and do it. And they can't hire the CEO. The CEO's like, I don't need to work for you. I'm not going to learn that much. I'm old. And so hopefully there's some things that I've done. I'm taking companies public that you're like, I might learn some stuff here. He'll add some value.
Has that situation ever happened to you where a CEO says, I don't want to do it with you, I can just do this on my own?
Actually, I've never had anyone take an idea, because ideas can be taken. You don't own them. I've never had that, partly because if I'm already down the path of hiring someone, like if you, in the back of your mind, you're thinking you're starting from scratch. I already have a funded company. if you don't take this job, probably in 4 weeks, I will have a CEO. You're just competing with me now, within a funded company.
Right.
So, and it's not great to take someone's idea and go do that. So I've never had that problem.
Right.
Yeah. Obviously, many of the companies that you've started have gone on to have successful exits, whether it's going public or being acquired. And we often hear in Silicon Valley about exit strategies, and if you should have one when you're starting the business. Do you typically have one when starting a business? Do you have kind of this long-term vision of what you imagine that business will kind of exit, or like I guess what the exit would look like, or not really?
I don't even know that. I don't know the meaning of that word.
Oh,
no, I'm
business
kidding.
is
What I
starting
mean,
for the
no, I'm kidding. What I mean is
Yeah.
that I never think about exit strategy.
Yeah.
And the reason I don't is that if this goes well, it's going to be 5 years before we're even open to exiting, because we want to get to some scale. If I'm starting it, because I think it may have real potential. It doesn't have to be the next Tesla, but it's going to get to $50 million in revenue, and that's going to take years. And any exit strategy we have today might be very different by then. The dynamics of the industry will change. It'll get better, get worse. Our product may change over time. So I never, ever think about that. And I don't want to make bad decisions of thinking, oh, we need to position it so that, General Motors will buy it, and then General Motors goes bankrupt. So that was a bad strategy. Look, business isn't that complicated. Meaning we need to build a business that has a lot of revenue and eventually has a lot of profits. Now, that's hard to do, but that's all we're all trying to do. If we do that, we will have many options. We can go public. We can sell it. We can just dividend money back to us all day long. So I don't even need to worry about that. 95% of companies never get to $100 million in revenue and $10 million in profits. That's really hard. So
Kevin,
that's the only focus.
do you ever worry about how you will scale yourself? Meaning, right now you're obviously a big value add to the CEOs and the teams that take on the ideas that you present them. I know you said you have a team of 20, but a lot of times people are like, well, I want to work with Kevin. If Kevin's not there, I don't want Pat to be my chairman. I don't want Posh to be my chairman. I want Kevin. How do you work around that?
So that happens a little bit, but we're all replaceable and trainable, and so I'm not worried about that. I've over the last couple of years built up a very good team. So like in healthcare, I have a managing partner of healthcare, Brenton, who has an MD, MBA, and so in the healthcare companies, he knows a lot more than I do. He's a better person for those companies, and so he is the point person there. And people know that if he has a question on something he hasn't dealt with, he comes to me. But it doesn't have to happen that often. I have another partner, Jeff DeFlavio, who also has an MD, MBA, who started Group. It's a very successful healthcare company. I have a guy named Marshall Porter who runs our sort of non-healthcare practice, who worked for me at Gilt, ran companies. These are very good people who are very credible, and that's the way to scale.
Yep.
So I'm pretty happy with the team. But that's, look, it's always a challenge when you started the company. People would love to have you.
Right. It's interesting. Last week we spoke to Nubar Afeyan, who is the founder of Flagship Pioneering and Moderna. Sure. And, so listeners will know by the time your episode comes out on the show, he talks about this concept of parallel entrepreneurship, which sounds a lot like, what you have done. Yeah. Why do you think these entrepreneurs that are, in this space of parallel, serial, whatever you want to call it, entrepreneurship, why have they found more success? I know that's a generalized statement, but you see it more often than not.
No, I would say that there aren't that many examples. There's a handful of examples where it has worked, and the reason it's been hard to do is that you first of all have to have ideally years and years of experience and credibility to then be able to do this, and you still have to want to work hard.
Right.
That limits the pool. If I went back and we did a flashback to the internet conference in 1998 or 1999 that I was at on the circuit, most of the people are retired. You know,
Mm.
all the CEOs of Yahoo and those places, they're not necessarily in the game anymore. They're all gone.
Yeah.
And so it's, as I said earlier, I think my job's a hard thing to do if you're 28, but you got to still keep working.
You know, it's interesting. We talk about all the different sort of successes that you've had. But you mentioned you start all these companies every year. I'm guessing a lot of them do end up failing or shutting down. And I think it's, knowing when to quit or knowing when to pivot or switch gears is just as important as anything. And so you talk about your approach to founding them, but in terms of that initial kind of phase of testing out the market, seeing how people react to it, when when is usually for you like the right time to know, hey, is this worth going after or not? Because typically when entrepreneurs start a business, it's like their baby, right? It's their vision, it's their baby. But you having like all these different visions and all these different babies, I don't know how attached you are to the initial idea and hypothesis, or if you're pretty kind of neutral about it, and like just knowing when to quit.
Yeah, so a couple points. One, I've had a couple not work, but I haven't had that many not work. Yeah, but there'll be more now because it takes a few years to not work. And so a couple of years ago, I was starting fewer of them. So there'll be probably more in the future. But in general, it's really going pretty well. One advantage in having multiple companies that you founded is that it makes you more objective about them. To your point, when you're the CEO, you need to have tunnel vision. You need to only be thinking about what you're doing. As a result, it's hard to admit that your baby's ugly and it's not working. It's easier for me. I'm less emotionally involved in any one company. And so I can come to you and say, look, I just don't think this is working, and try and convince you that we're there and that we need to sell. I mean, I had a company called Workframe that was using software to manage assets, your furniture and real estate assets for companies. And we raised probably $8 million over 4 or 5 years. But it just didn't really take off. And so we decided it wasn't working and the team agreed and we sold it for like $3 million. So most people took a big loss and it was the right thing to do. And because one of the things the CEOs tend to actually stay too long. They just don't want to give up. And we all have friends who've been working on some company that's not really working and they've put 6 years into it. And you can't do that. Your time is too valuable. Right. So I encourage them to say, look, if it's not working, let's close it down. You'll move on. You'll do something else. You'll get another swing at it. Mm-hmm. It's no big deal. These things happen.
Right.
But if the market's changed or it's not a good idea, we shouldn't do it.
Speaking of the like ideation process when it comes to coming up with like sort of startup ideas, they say like ideas are a dime a dozen. I don't know if good ideas are a dime a dozen, but like ideas are a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
What is, I mean, and to come up with creative ideas, you have to be pretty, out there, just like getting inspired by things and just learning and learning and learning. I see you have a lot of books behind you there. I'm guessing you're a pretty avid reader, but what do you typically do to just stay in the loop, stay inspired, see what's happening, to be able to come up with, constantly come up with new good ideas that are going to be successful businesses?
Yeah. So it's reading a lot, but it's also just talking to people and, diving in. Like if I'm interviewing you and you're coming from some company, I just want to hear about what are the challenges, what's happening. People within their industry know the challenges. Like when you're building a business, even doing a podcast, whatever vendors you deal with, sometimes you'll tell me, God, it's incredible. I cannot find anyone to provide this. I'm looking at your microphone, but can't find a good microphone, or they're crazy expensive. And so then sometimes I'm like, wow, that's interesting. There's so many people doing this. Maybe there's a market for a better microphone or a cheaper microphone. Or something. And that's where you come up with things. I mean, I'll give you a good example. We've started a couple of healthcare companies and realized that even though one was for maternal care and one was for sleep, we had to build the same website. That you had to book appointments with someone. There was a lot of content. It had to be HIPAA compliant. And so we're like, wait a second. Why isn't there a Shopify for healthcare companies? And it turns out there wasn't really. And so it's called Capable Health. And we have 20 clients using it right now. And so we just realized by keeping our eyes open that was needed out there. It was a problem. Everything has to solve a problem out there. Things that are hard to get, things that are expensive. I'm also thinking of fundamental trends. When we have an offsite, I put up 2032. That's 10 years from now. anything you believe. I want to know, do you believe this will be true in 2032? Because it takes 10 years to build a big company. So what do I believe in 10 years from now? Robotics. That's why I have a dedicated robotics person, because those problems of higher labor costs and shortage of people are not going away. I started an outsourcing company because finding engineers is a problem that's not going away. I have a person focused on materials science because the breakthroughs in materials science and nanotechnology are fascinating, going to grow. And then healthcare is slightly different. It's going to grow, but in the United States, it's such a terrible system. I mean, your knee surgery is like $40,000, but yet in France, it's $10,000 and it works just as well. So I can do better. At the end of the day, you've got to figure out something you can do better. So the idea on this new is just always thinking of problems and how we solve them, and then interviewing a lot of people.
So when you do have these ideas, is your immediate reaction once you sort of ponder it a little bit and decide, yeah, maybe we should start a company around this or test it out, is to build it? Or do you also like invest in other companies that you come across that are like, wow, that's impressive. They're actually doing exactly what I thought is an issue. Instead of going through this whole thing of building it, I might just invest in this company because I believe the founder has what it takes to make it successful.
Absolutely. So my first instinct is to build it, but and often we do now process-wise these deep dives. So someone will spend a month looking at fertility, and so sometimes after interviewing a lot of people and seeing all the challenges and finding women and men who've been dealing with some aspect of fertility, we think, oh, we've got an idea. And then sometimes we either don't have an idea or run across a company and we're like, oh my God, what a team, what a good idea. Let's invest in there. So we start, I said, about 8 companies a year or 9, and we probably invest in 15 companies a year that we run across. Now, we never want to have two things that are competitive with each other. So we've got to choose, either we're investing or we're starting in a vertical.
What is your personal purpose?
So one of the things that I drive my life on is just, what do I enjoy doing and what can I do that has an impact? And so for me, those happen to coincide, that creating and building businesses, both for-profit and non-for-profit, are where I enjoy things. Like, other people want to be listening to opera all day or playing golf. I just don't enjoy that as much. I'm not even working. I mean, this is what I do for fun. I do more and more on the nonprofit side. I have a social impact general partner. So because we don't have outside money in our firm, we can actually make investments that are social impact driven, that maybe have a slightly lower return, but we think make the world a better place. That's the big advantage we have. So we have a whole practice doing that. Over time, I will do even more in that space. But there's hardly anything that makes me feel better than realizing I was at the Zola board meeting today. We have 250 people, hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of very happy brides and grooms and brides that, for the most beautiful day of their life, had a great experience. We've created jobs. We've created a great product. I feel good about that.
Yeah, you mentioned social entrepreneurship, or and also I saw that, or I read that you are very philanthropic. You're very involved in like different organizations. I'm curious, as someone who is doing that, but also is very much maybe for lack of a better word, a capitalist when it comes to like building businesses. How much I guess with some of these issues that maybe you're passionate about, how have you seen that private companies are making more of an impact trying to solve those issues in general, we're generally speaking here, than the kind of the nonprofits or the public side?
It just depends on the issue. So there are, we were investing in a company that's going to provide childcare for blue collar workers, emergency childcare within blue collar workers at like a UPS or FedEx, and that's something that's really needed. But it's going to be a for-profit company, and I think that's a good solution because there's money coming in and incentives to make that work. If you said, I was on the board of Human Rights Watch for 12 years, is there anyone who's going to pay money in the for-profit sector to fight to make sure that in Uganda or in the Caribbean that you can't just discriminate against gay people? No. There's no for-profit model there. And so it has to be a nonprofit model. I'm very involved in the psychedelic industry. And so for the first several years, the only money out there was nonprofit research. I helped fund the Yale Center for Psychedelic Research to prove that there was actually a there. And what's interesting in that industry now is that now, because that has been established and nonprofit money played an extraordinary role for the last 15 years, for-profit money, including my own, I've started a for-profit company now as well, will fund this and take it to the next level and turn it into a $10 billion industry that will help so many people in mental health. And so that's a good example of there was a role for nonprofit and then there's a role for profit.
Mm-hmm.
And both are extremely important.
You know, with all these different businesses and nonprofits and organizations you're involved in, is there like one singular issue or thing that you are very, very, very passionate about, that like long term, all these things sort of coming together, converging into one thing that you hope to accomplish? Or is it just kind of a bunch of different issues and things that you're passionate about and interested in and trying to just like solve them separately, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I wouldn't unite them under one umbrella. You know, our world is incredibly complicated. And so there's so many different things that solve a problem, you know, somewhere. We started a company in meth addiction, a huge problem. No one's tackling it. We're getting very good results. That's just a very different problem than all the things that are happening in climate change. Both are valuable. Both are interesting. You know, databases can be used now to do things that could never have been done before and are a very important part of the ecosystem. You can't unite these all under one umbrella. You know, we have a big, complicated world. I happen to be intellectually interested in a lot of different things, which is why this business, what I do, it suits me, because I love tackling different topics and I try and bring things across. But that's not for everyone.
100%.
What advice would you give to high school students and college students who are similar to you, that, you know, have leadership capabilities, have, have this visionary mind, and, you know, are confused? Perhaps they don't know what they want to do. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, and it's in your lifetime, you got to try and figure out what you like to do, because there is nothing more important than feeling like I go to work every day and I like what I'm doing. And there are people who are, you know, lawyers and computer programmers and actuaries and salespeople who like what they're doing, but they can't like the other person's job. So you just got to figure out, are you the programmer who likes tackling a very difficult problem, pretty solitary, you know, all day? Or are you the salesperson who wants to be in front of everyone? And those are two easy ones to predict. And it's hard for people to figure out what's right for them, but they got to be doing what they like, and what they like is what they're going to be good at long term. Right. Everyone likes success, and so they've got to find that. And you know, when I work with, I talk to a lot of younger people. I have 3 kids between 22 and 27. They're friends. I try and figure that out and help them figure that out. But sometimes, you know, we all have friends who don't figure that out until they're 35 or 40.
Would the high school Kevin be surprised at the level of success that current Kevin has achieved?
Not as much as you. I mean, I definitely had big expectations. It wasn't specifically this. I thought I'd be running a big company by now. That was my dream at the time.
Like CEO of Pepsi type of thing?
Yeah.
Is there are there any like CEOs now or founders that you really look at and be like, wow, they're like a different breed?
So look, I've always thought that Jeff Bezos is the most extraordinary, you know, CEO out there. I mean, this is a guy who saw it from day one, how big it was going to be, had a long-term vision, expanded it, hired great people. I mean, so I think I know him a little bit, but not that well, but remarkable what he has done. Remarkable. So I think that's very impressive. You know, I love the fact that also the management team at Amazon, when he left, all his direct, on average, they'd been there like 14 years. So even though he's, you know, I'm sure demanding to work for, a bunch of people like to stay there for a long time. Far fewer companies have Amazon CEOs than you would think, given that it employs more people than anyone else and is in 100 different industries. They keep their good people. They execute well. I mean, nothing's perfect, but God, they've done a great job in many ways.
Yeah, no question about that. Kevin, I feel like we could sit here and just chat all day. There's so much to unpack here, but we can't thank you enough just for being here and just sharing your wisdom and all these, experiences you've had, and excited to see where the companies you're starting today go. And I'm sure, you're going to have no shortage of success there. So appreciate your time, and hope to keep in touch.
Great. Well, good catching up with you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one.
Yep.